Thank you. I just want to say hello and welcome to everyone to EHRC webinar today. The topic is taking care of your employees, and today's session is the new normal, where we will introduce Dr. Ryan Todd from headversity. I'm Marie Mold, and I'm the Manager of Stakeholder Engagement here at EHRC. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the National Office of Electricity Human Resources Canada is located within the traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. EHRC honors the peoples and land of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and their valuable past, present, and future contributions to this land. So before we get started, I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping notes. This session will be recorded today, as you heard, and available on our website at electricityhr.ca. We ask that you please mute your microphones and turn the cameras off while we have our special guest speaker present. And there will be an opportunity to ask questions. You can populate those in the chat session or unmute your microphone at the end of the presentation. And we highly encourage it. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Ryan Todd. Dr. Todd is a psychiatrist and technologist, founding the workplace mental health and resilience platform, headversity. His work at headversity brought together a team of psychiatrists, psychologists, and educators to build an industry redefining platform that is setting the new standard for workplace mental health and working with some of North America's leading employers, such as Shell Global and First Group America, while also working with post-secondary institutions like NAIT, SAIT, College of North Atlantic, and Yukon University. Dr. Todd is also an award-winning documentarian. I can't speak today, excuse me. A top 40 under 40 recipient with Avenue Magazine, a published researcher, and the host of a popular podcast, HR podcast, Beyond the Checkbox. Through headversity, Dr. Todd envisions getting the core training skills out of the backlog mental health system and into employees' hands. Also of note, if you're currently an EHRC member with us, headversity is part of our roster of partners for members only, which will receive a discount when you're using any of these partner or perk services. So now I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Todd. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and excited about the session today. We have a smaller group, so I'm okay for folks to chime in, turn your camera on, be as engaged today as we can. If there was thousands of people on Zoom, it's a little more difficult, but please, if you have any questions or commentary throughout this, just turn your microphone on, or I'm watching the chat room too on my laptop, so I'm happy to take any questions and make this as interactive as a session as possible. And that's what today really is all about, is about providing you some value. And we're going to look at things in a bunch of different paradigms, because things have been very stressful for us, in particular as workplace leaders. Things have been extremely stressful for us in the last year and 2 years. And I felt, as a psychiatrist, that the mental health, call it the crisis, would in some ways dissipate over after the pandemic. The post-pandemic era would be a time of joy. What we've seen actually is the opposite. We've seen an echo pandemic where people are coming to emergency rooms for psychiatric issues more. We've seen 4 times greater the rates of depression than we did in even the early stages of the pandemic, 3 times greater the rates of anxiety. So we know that right now is a very stressful time. And there's a lot of data from previous large-scale events to explain, at least in part, why this might be. So that if we all remember, most of us are Canadian on this call, we remember the horrific fires in Fort McMurray. And what happened was half the town of Fort McMurray, where a lot of the oil sands and energy in our country comes from, half that town was wiped out due to a wildfire. And the trauma that caused was horrific, physical trauma, destruction. But what we saw actually was that it was only 12 to 16 months after that event, after the fires were out, after the homes were rebuilt, that short-term disability costs went through the roof. They actually saw a sharp spike in short-term disability costs. And when I talk to are leaders in disability in healthcare and in various industries across the country, we are seeing what I've heard is an increase in short-term disability due to mental health at a rate that we have not seen. So that's part of why I'm here, is to help us get ahead of that adversity and to really bring this down to a personal level. So today, what I would like to do is take us through a couple of different exercises. We're going to do a lot of writing today. I have my whiteboard going. We are going to ask you to do a lot of writing. So the first thing I'd ask you to do is just get out a paper and pen, because we're going to do a lot of exercises today as a group and as individuals. And the paradigm that I want to bring to you is called interpersonal therapy. Now, IPT is the paradigm that we're talking about, but it was really designed in the 60s, 70s, and still ongoing research on this type of therapy that helps people in transition from something very traumatic and difficult to something new. And we talk a lot in mental health about post-traumatic growth. And it's like if you could imagine a forest fire, like we saw in Fort McMurray, burning down a number of forests, burning down a lot of trees. What we see 10 years later is the nutrients from that fire made the soil so rich that the trees and actually the forest grows and is reborn in a lot of ways in a stronger and thicker way. And that's what we shoot for as human beings. And that's what we're trying to get through today, is how do we go through a process of transition after this pandemic? How do we adapt to what we used to call the new normal, early stage pandemic? Now this is the new normal. What does that look like? And how can you as a leader take skills to help your employees throughout that training, throughout that transition, throughout that very difficult time? So that's where we're at right now, and I'm really excited about this session today. Okay, so we're going to take the next kind of 30 minutes, 45 tops. This won't be an hour-long session where we don't have engagement and we're here just listening to a webinar. So I want your questions in the chat room, please. Feed them to me alongside this entire session. I'd like you to chat with me too, because we have the size of a group where we can do it. And I wanted to go a little old school today, so I actually made cue cards. When was the last time that you saw cue cards? For me, it was quite a long time ago. But I want us to put in the chat room, and I'm asking one question with our first cue card. Can we read that? Can we zoom in on that guy? Okay, the cue card reads, the most stressful experience we can have is blank. All right, the most stressful experience. Can we zoom in on that, Corgi?
Closer to your face.
Oh, okay, that's easier. Okay, look at that. Okay, the most stressful experience we can have is blank. I want you to go into the chat room and fill in the blank for me. What is the most stressful experience we can have? Yeah, absolutely, Marie. That is significant, to see our life threatened. Yeah. Anyone else? Thanks, Sylvie, for that. Elizabeth, yes, absolutely. The unknown, very good. Anyone else want to chime in? What is the most stressful experience that we can have as human beings? Okay, so what we do know is from years of research in adversity and resilience is that the most stressful experience we can have is around change. And all of you are outlining something around change. Bereavement, death, the unknown, where do we go next? Not being able to pay bills, yeah, that is absolutely bang on, Danielle. So we had seen a large-scale study done by the American Psychological Association that had shown that the most stressful things in North America, money, conflict and interpersonal relationships, health, and all those come down to change and us changing our lives in some capacity. And we actually know there's a very specific type of change that impacts us greater. And that change is most stressful when, one, it is sudden, two, it is out of our control, and three, it is severe. Okay, so one, it is sudden, two, it is out of our control, and three, it is severe. And death and bereavement in the family is something that is very much in line with that. And there's an experiment that I want to talk about briefly about change. And what we do in psychiatry, is we like to hook people up to machines like functional MRIs, so we can measure how the oxygen and blood moves in the brain. Why do we want to do that? Essentially because we want to see where people are moving the energy in parts of their brain, because we think that certain parts of the brain are responsible for how we process certain things. Okay, so when we put people in a functional MRI and we do a card changing experiment with them, that means we lay down a card and it's the 4 of spades. And then we put the 4 of spades down and the 4 of spades down, and we keep flipping 4 of spades over. If we change that card to something that is different, the Queen of Hearts, for example, we notice that there's an uptick in blood and oxygen to a place called our amygdala. And that is one of the oldest parts of our brain, but we know that is responsible for processing things like stress. That is a fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain. So we know that change, even in a small, very controlled environment, is something that is stressful for us. Now, to get over this, one thing that we have to do is to really manifest this. So what I'd ask us to do right now with your pen and paper is to just simply write down all the stressors that you have in your life right now. Okay, and I'll take the time to do this. I have my little whiteboard. So what are all the stressors that you have going down in your life right now? And I want you to at least come up with 5. Just get it all out. Let's go through that initial stage of a good IPT process. What are all the things that you're dealing with right now that are stressful for you? And I'll do this alongside you. So let's take a couple minutes to do this right now. Let's do a little bit of lonely work. So I'll give you like 2 minutes to just be cathartic and write down all the stressors that you're experiencing right now. Okay, I'll give you a couple more minutes to wrap up, and then we're going to just do a very quick kind of mental exercise around these stressors. But this is the first kind of stage of a good IPT process, just to be cathartic, get these things out so we can talk about them. Okay, so I'll go through mine. So, and I don't expect us to share all of our stressors, but in a moment of vulnerability, I'll just take you through kind of what mine are. So, my daughter has a cold right now, so she's home from daycare. That's a bit stressful. I hope she's okay. I didn't get to work out this morning, and for me, that's really stressful. That might sound weird, but I need to exercise every day because I'm kind of a mind races kind of guy, so I need to do that, and I wasn't able to do that this morning. Just ongoing interpersonal stuff at work. We have a large number of employees now, and everyone has their own personal needs and things that we need to take care of. I didn't really sleep well last night. My wife is a physician. She was on call, so she was getting paged throughout the night. Because she's a physician, she's actually going to be working at least part of the year in Toronto. So I'll be kind of back and forth between Calgary and Toronto, and I don't know how that's going to work out. So those are all the things that I'm dealing with right now. And at times those get better, at times those things get worse. And one strategy that I want you to deploy right now when you're thinking about your stressors, one, this is a trick, just to write them all down on a piece of paper. Why do we do that? Because there is a process that happens when you write. And there is a bit of a metaphor that happens when you write, to just be cathartic and get those thoughts from living up here and not being able to think about them, and some being subconscious and simply just becoming more and more stressful, to making them conscious and putting them on a piece of paper. And then the next thing that I do is understand that most of these things are actually very much out of my control. Most of these things are very much out of my control. And what we like to think of is what is in your control, it's anything that is within your skin. Those are my thoughts, that's my effort, that's my emotions, that's my attitude towards things, but everything else is really outside of your control. We can only pretend to exert control on those things. So what I literally like to do when I'm feeling very stressed out, and this is a preventative measure so things don't get worse, is to just literally put a box around it. And that also is a bit of a metaphor for putting something in a box and being able to rationalize and contextualize is put them in there, because if we want to, be cathartic and get rid of some of those negative stressors, they can't live up here, but they also just can't live in the ether, right? They can't be out here anyway. So we actually have to put them in a physical space, and let's put them in a box. That's the first very simple tool that I use with a lot of patients, and I'd encourage you to use that when you're stressed out. And today we just did it. We just put all of our worries in a box and put them in a physical place. And there is a process there, and we know through a lot of research, again, in putting people in a functional MRI, that this reduces the stress and reduces the areas of the brain that deal with stress from the amygdala. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about today, was just being cathartic and writing things down and making them concrete, and then putting them in a box. And I call this a worry box. A very simple trick that we can use with ourselves or with employees if we're becoming overwhelmed. Okay, the second thing that I want to talk about was the pace of change. And so here is my next old school flashcard. And I'd like to get some feedback on this. Can you read that, Corgi?
Yeah.
Okay, so the pace of change is blank. In our world, the pace of change is blank. I'd love to hear from you of what you think this could be. Intense. Elizabeth, you're absolutely right. All right, any other feedback on what the blank could be? The pace of change in our world is what? Fast. Sylvie, I agree with you there. Marie said it's overwhelming. Yep, I agree with that too. Complex. Thank you, Adele. Okay, these are excellent answers. My thesis about change is that it is all those things. Danielle said it's constant. Adele said it's complex. Marie said it's overwhelming. We've heard that it is fast. My thesis is that the actual pace of change that we're experiencing is increasing. I would say it is increasing. It is all those things. It is fast, it is overwhelming, it is complex. But we know that the way that we are asked to adapt to new technologies, the things that we're asked to adapt to in our workplace is ever increasing. And I think about my grandfather when I think about when he was in the workplace. So growing up in a very small town, my grandfather was he sold bulk oil. So he sold barrels of oil to farmers. And he did that for the duration of his career. Actually, he was the mayor of our very small town, and he put the first sewage system in our very small town. And we're talking 75, 80 years ago, 100 years ago. And the thing that astounded me about my grandfather was that he had essentially the same career selling barrels of oil to farmers in the community and around Macklin, Saskatchewan for close to 30 or 40 years. The technological change that he saw during that time was pretty constant, but it was not fast. Like, for example, when my grandfather grew up, he had a horse and a buggy. He went to school in a cart driven by a horse. And then, of course, the Ford trucks came out and the vehicles. And that was essentially, if you ever talk to him, he's long since passed, but if you ever talk to him, he would say that was the major change that he saw over the 30 years of his career. Now think about the technological change that we've experienced in the last 5 years. Think about the technological change that we've experienced in the last 2 years. And think about how this little guy here has changed the way that we perceive and communicate. in our world. And I want us to be conscious of that. So the exercise that I'd like you to do right now, very quickly, is write down all of the modes of communication that you have available to you right now. Okay? So I have my phone and my laptop, but I just want you to stretch your inventory of what modes of communication do you have available to you right now. Let's make this subconscious thing of how we're pulled in 100 different directions very conscious. Okay, and I'm going to write this down with you as well. Okay, so I can think of right now, am I looking at this one here? This one here, okay, just want to make sure I'm meeting the eye line here. So on my phone, I can text, but that means SMS, WhatsApp, and Signal are the 3 apps I have available. I can email, but I also Slack. I can physically phone someone, and then I have like a personal, like I can just talk to people in the office, and we're back in the office now. That's actually pretty wild to think about how even our way of communication technology has so rapidly changed. And knowing that change is the most stressful thing that can happen to us, and knowing how rapid that change has been, this is very stressful for us as humans. And Ramos Hogard, who's an expert in mindfulness, calls this the paid reality. We are pressured, we are always on, we are information overloaded, and we are distracted. And that is how you are, that is how I am, that is how all of our employees are. We are pressured to continually push the needle, whether it's hiring or retaining employees, or whether it's increasing revenue or outputs or projects. We're always on. You cannot take a minute off now. We're always on Zoom. And I appreciate a bunch of our cameras are off today, because I imagine you've already been in 2 hours of meetings this morning with your cameras on. We're information overloaded. We've never had access to more information at any time in the history of the world. I can go on Wikipedia, YouTube, Google anything and find out anything about anything right now. And we're distractible. We have at our disposal all of these types of communication, and that can make for very stressful and distractible times. So I'd like it to take us through a very quick exercise today that we're going to do together, and it is a simple breathing exercise. And we're just going to picture a box in front of us, and we are going to do 4 cycles of breathing. And I want you to register how you're feeling right now. It might be a little overwhelmed, might be a little excitable, might be whatever, it's a little sleepy. And I want you to register how you feel after we do 4 very simple cycles of breathing. And this is the second tool that I want to use today, is this breathing tool. To get us out of this paid reality, I want to do just a very brief mindfulness practice. Okay, so important to have your feet on the ground. You can even do this standing. Just put your hands on your legs or on your chair, wherever it's most comfortable, but feel the feet, feel the soles of your feet on the ground. And I want you to take 4 breaths with me. If you can do in through the nose, out through the mouth, that's most helpful. And I want you to picture a box in front of you where we're breathing in for 2 seconds, we're holding it for 2 seconds. Breathing out for 2 seconds and holding that for 2 seconds. Okay, so I'll do the first one with you, then I'll walk alongside. Okay, so let's get started right now. So in for 2 seconds, 2, out for 2 seconds, 1, 2, hold it for 1, 2. Okay, another one. In, 1, 2, hold it, 1, 2, out, 1, 2, hold, 1, 2. Okay, we're going to do 2 cycles on 4-second intervals. So breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold it, 1, 2, 3, 4, out, 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold that for 1, 2, 3, 4. And the last one, get to the bottom of the diaphragm, really big deep breath in. 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4, and out. Let your shoulders drop. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So we've been able to do a little bit of a breathing exercise to just kind of reset all the stuff that was happening in our day. And that's the antidote to the busyness that we feel. And I just want you to register how you feel after breathing. Whenever I take even 10 seconds just to do one cycle of breathing, I feel different. I feel a lot different. And there's a lot of neuroscience to back up how that works in reducing something called cortisol. Cortisol is very connected to adrenaline and those stress hormones. And we can reduce that pulsing through our body by simply breathing. So if I have a challenge for you and another tool that I want to deploy today and that you can help deploy with your employees, it's to breathe. And I would even challenge you to start a meeting off. Might be a little awkward the first time, but I guarantee that your employees will actually enjoy it and even look forward to it. Just to start a meeting off, even with 2 deep breaths on a cycle. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. Out 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. We're hearing from Marie and Sylvie that they feel a little better, and I agree. I feel better just doing some deep breathing. Okay, let's get to the next skill. Now that we're grounded and connected, let's chat about the next part of this resilience training session today. All right, here is the cue card. And it reads, blank remains the most important resilience skill we have. Can you read that cue card? Maybe I'll put it closer to my face so we can zoom in there. Blank remains the most important resilience skill we have. All right, let's hear from you in the chat box. What is the most important resilience skill that we have? Taking time for myself each day. Excellent. What is the most important resilience skill that we have? Come on, I need more guesses. Letting go. Adele. Perfect. I love it. Marie said taking time for herself each day. Okay, so we know that all of these skills are important. And when we talk about resilience skills, Danielle said movement is very important. Energy management is a crucial skill. Mindfulness, mental health, mental fitness, hardiness. Marie says knowing what is out of our control. I completely agree. When we look at all of the resilience skills, from self-expertise to mindfulness, mental fitness, hardiness, energy management, throughout times of extreme change and when we are under duress, as a workplace, self-expertise and knowing yourself continues to be, if not a very important skill, the most important skill. And there's a lot of research to show that those who are the most emotionally intelligent or practice insight exercises actually can endure the most difficult situations. And insight and self-expertise remains one of the most important skills. So we're going to do a little bit of a self-expertise exercise right now. And the 2 of these exercises are very simple. One is about just understanding your insight and where you're feeling right now. So the key to exercising your self-expertise, 1 is to write down your mood. And 2, put a number to it, the intensity. Okay, so the mood is important because we often mix up mood with thought. And mood and emotion is defined with 1 word. And that's like disgust or anger or happy or sad. And there's a finite number of emotions that we experience. Okay, so I want you to write down your mood. And try and pin it down to 1 emotion that you're having right now. And I want you to write that down. And I'll do that alongside with you. Okay, my emotion I feel is energized. right now, and then let's put a number to it, 0 being the least intense experience of that emotion, and 10 being the most intense experience of that emotion. So I'm feeling like a 8 energized. And it's because I'm talking to you and I love doing these sessions. So that's the first piece of this self-expertise exercise, and that is a simple exercise that you can do every single day, a couple times a day if you'd like, just to check in with yourself and how you're doing. You can encourage your employees to do the same. The second exercise we're going to do is about your self-expertise and how you understand yourself and what we know as your brand. And this is called an above the line and below the line exercise. So right now, I'd like you to take a couple minutes, we'll take maybe 30 seconds right now, to think of a time where you performed very well in your job or at home or something, but think of it like a performance, like you did an exceptional job at that time. And I want you to put a couple words to that above the line, and then think of a time where you didn't do very well. So you were, struggling in that role or that situation or that conflict or whatever it is, and put that situation, a couple lines to that. And I'll do this alongside you. So let's take about 30 seconds to a minute to think of a situation where you really did well and a situation where you did not do well. Okay. So my situation that I didn't do well in is I was about a month ago in very extreme conflict with a board member that we had. We saw things very differently, and had to separate our work relationship. So that was something that really bothered me. I was not thinking clearly. I was losing sleep. That was a situation where I was not at my best. A situation recently where I thought I did better or thought I did well is we recently started working with one of the largest construction companies in the country, Headversity has. So that was a great process. Loved the people, loved the process, and it was a really important kind of deal that this company did with us to bring on Headversity to all their employees. So that's step 1 of this exercise. Step 2 that I'd like us to really get into now is define a couple of the things that you did during that performance. Again, let's call it a performance that really helped you, okay? And use one word if you can. So I'll do this alongside you, but list a couple of words of what really helped you kind of nail that thing, or what encouraged you to struggle when you're talking about that time where you really struggled. And then we'll come back and do the next step of this. So a couple words that really helped you thrive during that time. Like, what were the things and characteristics of you that helped you thrive? And then what were the characteristics of you that defined your struggle? Okay, so for me, I'm going to start with the time when I really struggled, when I had this conflict with a board member of our company. The thing that defined that for me is I'm very conflict adverse. I really don't like conflict, and I'm trying to work on that, trying to engage in more constructive discussions, but I really hate that. And then I felt like there was a lack of trust in that situation. I really hated that. That bothered me, that I didn't trust this individual, and I felt like this individual didn't trust me. That shook me at my core. Now, the second part of this is really important, because this is how we often can define our brand through difficult circumstances. Who cares what your brand is on a good day? We want to understand our brand when times get tough, when we're going through a global pandemic, when you're asked to roll out a new program to your entire company, when you have to have a difficult conversation with an employee. That is when we want our brand to show up. And how do we understand where we're best? How do we understand what our brand is let's focus on this positive situation and the key features of us during that situation. For me, when we closed this very large construction company, I felt like I was being thoughtful in how we were working together. Most importantly, I felt like we had a strong connection. And I pride myself on being able to create connections with people. As a therapist, as one of the leaders at headversity, as a father, I pride myself on doing that. So that is what I want my brand to be, as someone who creates connections. Okay, so I'd like you to think about right now and take a couple moments, as we are inevitably going to get into more stressful and difficult times. Circle the word that sticks out at you most in terms of what you would like your brand to be during difficult times. For me, it is someone who creates connection. That is what I want my brand to be. This is the brand exercise. So just to review this portion on self-expertise, which we know is an important skill, especially when we're in stressful times. One, to get our grounding, to get our ability to figure out where we're at right now. Name your emotion, put a number to it, okay, so you can figure out where you're at right now. If you would like to extend that and figure out who you want to be in the future, who you want to be in that difficult circumstance. This is an above the line, below the line exercise. A situation where you really did well, a situation where you didn't do very well. What were the key features of each situation? And circle the word, the one word that sticks out to you as to what you want your brand to be thriving in those key situations. We know that people who practice self-expertise and do practices like these have more emotional intelligence and are able to really thrive in difficult circumstances. Okay, so I would like to wrap up with one last piece around the workplace, and I have created, of course, a cue card for this, and I'd like some answers around this. Nothing is more important at work than your blank. All right, so fill in the blank. Nothing is more important at work than your blank. Let's get some feedback on what do you think? What do you think this should be? Nothing is more important at work than your blank. Let's hear from you in the chat. Thank you. Excellent. Then yourself, your sense of self, your ethic, your engagement. Excellent. Then your integrity. This is great because this is a super open-ended fill in the blank. So this could mean anything. I love it. Integrity. And I'll tell you my perspective soon. All right, anyone else? Then your relationships. Okay, I want to take that one and run with it because I think that is of utmost importance. This is what I would argue is one thing that we've learned throughout the pandemic is that nothing is more important at work than your team. And Marie called it relationships. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. And what we saw throughout the pandemic was, you know, we had our old way of working together. And it was everyone in the office, and we did have teams, and we had one-on-ones. But what I saw was a very sudden transition to technological meetings, obviously, like meeting on Zoom or meeting on Teams or Skype or whatever the platform you were on, but a very intense reliance on that 5 or 7 or 3 or 20-person team. what we saw was, because of the pandemic, went from this office where we could see everyone and kind of get a physical sense of the entire workplace to, oh, I actually only have visibility into the 3 to 5 people that I work with directly. And we had to create a strength in that team to move our organizations forward. We had no choice. And what we saw from that was that team was the most important unit, the most important functional unit out of any of the other functional units of the organization. So I'd like us to reflect on that. And I want to do a little bit of a IPT exercise with our remaining minutes. And it's called an interpersonal inventory. And you can do this over the course of the next 2 minutes like we will, or you could take the next couple of weeks to do it because it can be a tricky exercise. But I'd like you to take some context here, either at home or at work. I want you to think of our relationships, because we are nothing without our team. We're nothing without our family and those relationships. In particular, in difficult times, we cannot get through those times without our team and our family. So I'd like you to draw some concentric circles, 3 if possible. And I want you to put yourself in the middle. There's little old me in the middle. And I'd like you to take a couple of minutes to write out some of the names of the people that are closest to you. And I want you to put the closest people right next to you, and a couple of examples of people who are further away from you. Family members that you haven't talked to, somebody who you just know peripherally. And the point of this exercise is to just get a roadmap of who you have in your life at work or at home, and who is on your team that you can rely on. And again, make these subconscious things conscious. So let's take a couple minutes right now. I'll do this alongside you. I'm going to put some key relationships here and then think of who would be kind of more peripheral to me. All right, let's take a couple minutes to do this right now. Okay, so for me, very close to me is my wife. I rely a lot on her for pretty much everything. I put Jordan, our COO, right next to her, but definitely not close to her. And I have teammates who are laughing about that because my wife might argue that our COO could be closer sometimes. Our leadership team at Headversity I'm very close with. I have a close colleague in psychiatry. I put my brothers and sister here, my parents, who I still connect with. I have a good group of kind of college friends that I put on this circle. And then I recently made a kind of a new connection that's just a peripheral individual so far, but could kind of become closer in that circle. Okay, so I'm hoping that you had a little fun with that, because what this does is, again, makes that subconscious thing of our relationships very conscious. And it also pins down who are the people that you can rely on when times are difficult and when you are facing that inevitable adversity that will come up in your workplace or at home. And that's what we're doing today. We are trying to get ourselves ahead of adversity. And this helps us define who in our life, who on our team that we can rely on during those difficult circumstances. Okay, so let's wrap up. First of all, I want to thank you so much for joining us today in this session. And we covered a couple of brief skills. The first one was on just simply writing down stressors in our life. Seems very simple, a very powerful exercise, something that we can do to make them conscious and then put them in a box, put them in that worry box. That was skill number 1. Skill number 2 was we learned a quick breathing skill to decrease the cortisol that is pulsing through our body during a stressful workday. And how do we do that? We do box breathing, and I would encourage you to do that with your employees as well. The third skill that we talked about today was around self-expertise. The people who thrive the most in workplaces, at home, have a high level of emotional intelligence. That's a trainable skill, and it starts with recognizing where you are right now and understanding what your brand is. And who cares about brand in the easy times? We want to know what our brand is in the difficult times. And for me, I want to be someone who connects with people. That's what I want my brand to be. Finally, we need to know who is on our team when times are difficult. And that's at work, that is at home. Sometimes those worlds are very melded, and sometimes they're the exact same. And to do that, to really define your circle, we want to create an interpersonal inventory. And I'd encourage you to do that a couple times a year to see really who is in my circle right now. Who can I rely on? And maybe there's some relationships that aren't as close to me that I'd want them to be. Maybe there's some people who are very close to me and I want to push them outside that circle, and that's okay, and we can set boundaries around that. I think that these resilience skills are some of the most important things that we can learn, and I can tell you that folks who come to see me as a psychiatrist, this is what we are trying to teach them to do, is learn these resilience skills. Very simple skills that I was fortunate to learn throughout medical school and my residency, really basic psychological things, easy tools, but hard to implement in practice. That's also what we've tried to do with headversity, is to roll these skills on a digital platform, learning management tools, so that you and your colleagues can practice them day in, day out. With that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and attention today, for joining me, for Marie, for setting up this session. This is absolutely the highlight of my day and my week, is being able to join leaders like yourselves who are part of important organizations with thousands of employees, to bring you these skills so you can bring these to your workplace, and hopefully we can figure out a way to bring these to your entire group. So with that, Marie, I don't know if you want to send off, but I'm happy to wrap things up as we send off the session today.
I will do that, but first of all, Ryan, I could listen to you constantly. So thank you so much. This was really valuable. I did have a couple of questions for you. I'm wondering if you're willing to answer just the few that I had, because you did mention a very interesting stat at the beginning about the fires in Fort McMurray, where you talked about the short-term disability hype 12 to 16 months afterwards. So I'm just wondering, in your professional opinion, if you foresee this as well with the pandemic, that there will be a delay because we're not finished yet. So I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, my opinion is that we will. In talking to leaders in disability, I had a conversation with the disability manager at Cowan last week, and she said that in her 20-year career, she has never seen increases in short-term, long-term, and absenteeism costs due to mental health issues. She's never seen this in her entire career. Makes some sense. This is probably the biggest event that we've experienced, intergenerational event that we've experienced in terms of a change, sudden and radical change, and out of our control. So we do expect that these disability rates will continue to climb, and we're trying to get ahead of those as much as we can with our technology and our upskilling.
Okay, and just one other thing, just to kind of flow through on that particular topic, is change. There is lots of change, but do you also see that because there is focus on other things that are happening around the world, like the war in Ukraine, that the focus of the pandemic is kind of diminishing in regards to mental health, because now there's other things that people are focusing on?
Yeah, I think there's less of a focus on it, and that's you could argue that that's okay, and someone argue that that's bad, because we still have to be we still have to be diligent as to our practices. But I do see a decrease in focus. However, what we've experienced, right, is this other enormous event with the war in Ukraine, and we continue to get like really horrific news about like things changing in our world, changing, like the shootings in Texas yesterday. Like, things continue to happen in our world, and we have access and knowledge to those things. And on top of that, the way that we interact and communicate is always changing. So the change is constant, and as we mentioned, right, it's intense, and sometimes it's overwhelming. And although the pandemic might be sort of in the rearview mirror, we're just seeing a whole host of other things. And that will continue, right? We will continue to see change in the workplace. And our job of it as leaders is to get ahead of that.
Thank you. And you know what, like you said, this doesn't help, right? So trying to put that away so many times during the day so you're not constantly looking at that news. Okay, perfect. So I will wrap this up. So I just want to thank Ryan so much for today's session and all of the participants that did join us. If you want to get more information about this type of program, along with other programs and benefits from EHRC, please visit our website, and you can always send me an email. There's also the newsletter that you can register with onto our website. It's at the bottom of each page. So that wraps up today's webinar. But out of this series, there is one more final webinar that we will be doing next Wednesday, June the 1st, with Humberto Carollo of White Ribbon, and he's going to be presenting promoting allyship and solidarity in the workplace. So that's another one that you won't want to miss. I want to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day to everybody. Bye for now.